I know my hair is crazy again. I shower right before I do these things. Hi, I'm Grace DeWolf. I'm the education manager at Next Act Theater. Today we're going to talk about Shakespeare, the person. Shakespeare was born in 1564, Stratford-upon-Avon, which is a town outside of London. Around 1590, he went to London and wrote a lot of plays. In 1616, Shakespeare died. I could give you a better biography of Shakespeare the person. There are many books written about when Shakespeare was born, what he studied as a kid, when he went to London, what kind of plays he wrote, in what order, who his friends were, and I'll get into a little bit of that, but first, I want to try something. I'd like you to draw Shakespeare. Totally serious. Go find a piece of paper and any kind of writing utensil. It doesn't have to be good. You don't have to be an artist. Go ahead, pause, go find paper and pencil, come back, draw Shakespeare. Okay, does your picture look something like this? This is the Droeshout portrait. It was printed in 1623, 7 years after Shakespeare died. It was printed in a book called The First Folio, which is actually the first time anybody put together Shakespeare's plays into one book. Next to the portrait, you can find a poem written by Shakespeare's friend Ben Jonson. In the poem, Ben Jonson says, "This engraver was really bad at his job, and this does not look like my friend William Shakespeare." Okay, Grace, so what did Shakespeare really look like? Well, the truth is, we don't really know. Shakespeare never sat down for a portrait, and Elizabethans didn't have cameras. The National Portrait Gallery of London studied this picture for 3 years and officially declared that it is probably Shakespeare. I don't know. It's got an earring. Shakespeare wore an earring, right? Or how about this one? This is also Shakespeare. This is Shakespeare's death monument, put up right next to his grave. I've been there. I've seen it. Don't stare too long into its eyes. My point is, if this is Shakespeare, and 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 this is Shakespeare, ooh, hello, and this is Shakespeare, whatever you drew at the beginning of this video is also Shakespeare. It's been 400 plus years since Shakespeare died, so he's more of a cultural icon than he is a person by now. I like to think of Shakespeare as a fandom. I mean, think about it. All of these are Shakespeare, just like all of these are Spider-Man. There are nerds like me that will argue over minute details for ages. There are even people who will argue about who the original Shakespeare really was, which creates a whole slew of conspiracy theories. I mean, we even have Shakespeare cosplay. This Shakespeare mania all started with one dude, 100 years after Shakespeare died, who started celebrating Shakespeare's birthday to boost his own acting career. Also, European colonizers put Shakespeare into their textbooks, which is why we have Shakespeare in high schools today. William Shakespeare, the real person, wasn't even that interesting of a historical figure. This is Ben Jonson, Shakespeare's friend, also a playwright. He was branded on his thumb from the time he spent in prison after killing a dude. And this is Christopher Marlowe, also a playwright, also a friend of Shakespeare's, a gay atheist who might have been working for the Queen's Secret Service. Okay, I'm getting way off track. It's just really hard to find true hard facts about a guy that's been dead for 400 years and argued about for about as long. So here's the briefest history of Shakespeare's life you're ever going to hear. You ready? Shakespeare was born in a place called Stratford-upon-Avon. This is significant because he didn't go to a fancy school. He was educated like everybody else who grows up around farmers and sheep herders and other laborers. When he was 18, he married a woman named Anne, who was 26, and then 6 months later she had a baby. Do that math again. Somewhere in his early 20s, Shakespeare decided to go to London and become a playwright. That actually turned out pretty well for him. The theory goes that Shakespeare became such a popular playwright because he wasn't educated at Oxford University. Like we mentioned before, Shakespeare was actually pretty good at listening to the way people actually spoke, and his audiences liked it. He wasn't the most popular playwright at the time, but he was one of the most popular playwrights at the time. He had a total of 3 kids, Judith, Susanna, and, get this, Hamnet. Hamnet died very early. Draw your own conclusions. Shakespeare spent most of his life dividing his time between being a playwright in London and being a dad at home. Look at this word, playwright. Not playwright, playwright. The word right means laborer or builder of things, like a shipwright or a cartwright or a wheelwright. Playwrights in Elizabethan England were play patchers or builders of plays. They stole their plots from all kinds of sources. For example, there is a poem called Romeus and Juliet. It is the exact same story as Romeo and Juliet. Shakespeare just crunched the time down to 3 days and added Mercutio, who's super cool, so, you know. I mean, Mercutio as a character kind of has his own fandom. Nerd! And then Shakespeare died in 1616 of old age, natural causes. He was 52, which is pretty old for an Elizabethan. There were a lot of plagues. And that's pretty much the life of William Shakespeare as we know it. He didn't really write in a journal, or if he did, he wrote it on paper, which disintegrates. There were no cameras, there was no filming of anything. Nobody was documenting his life like he was gonna be this huge cultural icon later. So yeah, it's kind of sad that we don't know that much about his personality. Although, we can take some guesses based on some of the things he wrote. Here's an excerpt from Hamlet, where Hamlet is trying to prepare a whole bunch of actors to do a play that he wrote. It sounds very much like Shakespeare talking to his actors on how to act.
Speak the speech, I pray you, as I pronounced it to you, trippingly on the tongue. But if you mouth it, as many of our players do, I had as lief the town crier spoke my lines. Suit the action to the word to the action, with this special observance that you o'erstep not the modesty of nature. For anything so overdone is from the purpose of playing, whose end, both at the first and now, was and is to hold as 'twere the mirror up to nature.
Sounds to me like Shakespeare wanted his actors to stop making up their own lines and overacting the roles that he wrote for them. Here's a cool little piece of history. Plays were often collaborations between more than one author. We're pretty sure that Shakespeare was commissioned to write a monologue in a play called Sir Thomas More. Don't worry if you've never heard of it before, not a lot of people have. It was never performed during Shakespeare's time because it was too politically dangerous to do so. Here's a sample of the original monologue in what might be Shakespeare's handwriting. If so, this is the only example of Shakespeare's handwriting that we have, aside from a few signatures. P.S. None of which are spelled Shakespeare. Remember how spelling wasn't standardized? Anyway, the speech is really cool, and I'm gonna let Ian McKellen, who you might know as Gandalf, introduce it and then recite it for you.
Just 600 years ago, there was a riot in St. Martin in the Fields, and the complaint was about strangers. The strangers in our midst, and the cry was that they should be removed. Usual complaints about strangers, you know, they'd eat odd food, speak odd languages, take our jobs, take our houses, better send them back wherever they came from. And so the cry is that the strangers should be removed. And Thomas More replies, grant them removed, and grant that this your noise hath chid down all the majesty of England. Imagine that you see the wretched strangers, their babies at their backs with their poor luggage. plodding to the ports and coasts for transportation, and that you sit as kings in your desires, authority quite silenced by your brawl, and you in ruff of your opinions clothed. What have you got? I'll tell you. You had taught how insolence and strong hand should prevail. Say now, the king, as he is clement, if the offender mourn, should so much come too short of your great trespass, as but to banish you. Whither would you go? What country, by the nature of your error, should give you harbour? Go you to France, or Flanders, to any German province, to Spain, or Portugal, nay, anywhere that not adheres to England, why, you must needs be strangers. Would you be pleased to find a nation of such barbarous temper that breaking out in hideous violence would not afford you an abode on earth, whet their detested knives against your throats, spurn you like dogs, and like as if that God owned not, nor made not you, nor that the elements were all appropriate to your comfort, but chartered unto them? What would you think to be thus used? This is the stranger's case, and this your mountainish inhumanity.
So the only things that we might really know about Shakespeare is that he was born, he wrote some plays, and then he died. And somewhere in between, he really loved people. He wanted people to be treated with humanity. And he really wanted his actors to say his lines the way he wrote them. That's my Shakespeare, and now I hope it's your Shakespeare too. If you join us for the discussion section, I want to see your Shakespeare sketches, most definitely, and I want to know about what kind of legacy you want to leave the world. I hope I see you there. Till next time.